What's up guys, Phoenix here. This video is going to be another one of the Let's Talk videos, and this time we're going to be talking about the other deck that became viable due to Wing Raider's release date, and that is going to be Raidraptors. This deck, we've had a lot of the cards for it for a long time, but we never had Raidraptor Force Strix, which is the most important Xyz monster in the extra deck for this card, and then we never had Raidraptor's Tribute Lanius, which is one of the more important main deck monsters as well, but we finally got those imported to us from the OCG in the special pack Winged Raiders, and they came in alongside the Super Quantum Monarch cards. Now, the previous Let's Talk that I did on the Super Quantum Monarch deck was very well received, and there was a lot of positive feedback from it. There was a lot of discussion happening in the comments, and I really liked that, so I figured I would go ahead and make this video. I was kind of on the fence on whether or not I should actually do another one of these and talk about this deck, simply because, I mean, it doesn't have all of its support yet, and it is getting more support in Shining Victories, and getting more cards that I would justify as win conditions, better rank-up cards, Ultimate Falcon, which is essentially a Towers, a Apocalypse Towers type card, and like that in itself just justifies like as win conditions for the deck. But I figured I would go ahead and actually talk about it, and then we can talk about those cards when those cards actually are closer to their street release date. But ultimately, what we have on screen here is the deck that I was playing around with on my live streams. The past live stream that I I played this deck a bit. I mean, it's just there for a point of reference, but that is the deck that I'm currently playing. I'm still tweaking it around. I mean, this is sort of a deck profile and analysis type video, so you are free to use this and like just do whatever you want with it and work with it from there. Definitely go for it if it's something you want to do. But I mean, I wouldn't take any like it's basically just a really general deck list. Like, I'm not doing any like sort of extreme thinking into it. Is what I'm trying to say basically. But what we're going to be looking at is just the pure TCG form of this deck with, you know, without Skip Force, without Ultimate Falcon, without Satellite Falcon, none of these cards, and just looking at purely what we have in the TCG. And what we do have in the TCG is actually something that can be considered a very it's a very playable deck, but I think it might be past its prime. It does potentially have, you know, potential to do stuff. That's definitely not something I'm trying to say is that this deck can't play. The issue is that the deck is still missing pieces, and it's missing its most powerful pieces. The rank up magic card that we currently have is Soul Shave Force, and that's the best one that we have. And it does, like, it is good in the essence that it's a comeback card and it lets you access Cyber Dragon Infinity and stuff like that. I mean, it's still a good rank up card, but it's not as immediate of a play as it needs to be. And that can ultimately just cause problems. But I digress. Like, that's not really the most important part of like what makes this deck what it is. At this point, the deck really seems to kind of lack a win condition, if I could say that. The deck is very good and solid. Definitely not arguing that. The deck is very consistent. It's very solid. You can have multiple different opening plays. You have a lot of powerful cards in the form of these traps. Raptor's Gust is amazing. Readiness is very good for keeping you from dying. Icarus Attack has consistently been a format-defining card in the past when we had decks like Black Wings running around, as well as Harpies, and then that's only multiplied by the fact that we have Twin Twister that we can play in the deck as well, and we have cards that allow us to plus off of those cards, i.e. by like discarding Fuzzy Lanius, and the deck just generates raw advantage, and that's ultimately its only win condition at this point, is that it goes first, and the deck is very good at going first, and the deck is very good at ending its first turn with a very simple, like, +2 to +3, sometimes as high as a +5, in terms of how many cards that you have to your name, starting with 5 and ending with anywhere between 7 and 10. Like, that's the issue, though, is that that's kind of all the deck really has at that point. This is the epitome of a deck that kind of plays under old school Yu-Gi-Oh logic, while still being a newer deck, in that, in its current form, this deck wins its games just by pure card advantage. And that's not something that we've really seen in the game too much recently. Like, that's the deck's only real win condition, is like you just start spamming Force Strixes, getting your pluses, doing all your things, and then on your next turn, after you've used your traps to stop your opponent's plays and clear boards and do all that nonsense, you throw all of that card advantage at them and you just kill them with it, with like fields of triple Force Strix, maybe a Castel, maybe some random rank 4. Sometimes you just make Xerafen just to pump it to be huge and go for game shots. Like, there are all these different outlying factors, but the deck's win condition is basically just rank 4 spam. So it essentially just becomes another deck kind of like Satel and Yugioh, although in this deck's defense, it seems to function a little bit better than those decks because it just has more access to starter cards to get you into 4-Strix, which is basically your Gear Gigant, and then you have the entire rank 4 pool, and the only card that really restricts you in your plays is Fuzzylanius. That's the only card in the deck that actually restricts you into anything, and it restricts you into only summoning Raidraptors. There's nothing like Altair where you're like, oh, you can't attack with anything but Tellers this turn, and you definitely don't have to be flip-flopping armor and doing that stuff. Like, those sorts of problems don't really exist. The deck can play very aggressively. The deck has its own sort of mini Black Whirlwind in the form of Raidraptor Nest, which also just happens to recycle cards back from the graveyard, which is really good, and the card is searchable through Mimicry Lanius, which is very easily accessible in its own ways via the other cards in this deck. There's a lot of different overlap that this deck has built into it to allow you to access your first 4-Strix, and then your first 4-Strix usually snowballs you into your second or third one, and then you just keep your advantage up with Nest, you keep recycling your cards, all these different things, and you basically just play the deck as a rank 4 spam deck. But ultimately, whether or not that's good enough to compete in the current format is something that I haven't really been able to see yet. I mean, Ultimate Falcon is great. All of its support that comes out in Shining Victories definitely lets the deck take a different demographic and a different, operating stature. It still has the same base function that we currently have now, but it does have sort of more concrete win conditions attached to it. This deck has no such stigma right now. Its win condition is literally rank 4s, and rank 4s aren't really that great right now. But on the other side of that coin, to play devil's advocate, you're making these rank 4s because your first turn usually made you go into a massive amount of plus, and then you're just able to throw that into your opponent's things, thus making all those rank 4s free rank 4s, especially if you're able to, just do a standard opening and open 2 4-Strix. We'll say that's standard. 1 to 2 4-Strix is typically standard. Sometimes you can open 3. But if you're able to set that up with a Nest and then possibly have like Readiness or some sort of just any trap to protect the 4-Strixes, next turn those all get extra searches, and you just have so many monster resources to throw at your opponent. It's the literal definition of like insane. You have more monsters than you can physically use. You have more resources than you can physically use, and that is something this deck does very well. And it has a lot of different, like 2-card starters, like Vanishing Lanius plus any monster is a starter. Summoner Monk plus any spell is a starter, and these are starters that get you +3s and card advantage and stuff. Like Summoner Monk plus any spell can end with 2 4-Strix, a Nest up, a Search, and a Fuzzylanius in your hand. Summoner Monk plus spell ends with 5 cards. And the way that happens, in case you're wondering, is you go Summoner Monk, ditch the spell, you special summon Tribute Lanius out of your deck, Tribute Lanius sends Mimicry Lanius from your deck to the graveyard, you banish Mimicry Lanius, add Nest. 4-Strix is generic. So you overlay Summoner Monk and Tribute Lanius into the 4-Strix. Then you detach 4-Strix, you detach one from 4-Strix to search Fuzzylanius. You special summon it. Now you have 2 Raidraptors on the field. You activate Nest. You use Nest to add Singing Lanius from your deck to your hand. You special summon it, and then you overlay with Fuzzylanius and Singing Lanius into a second 4-Strix. Then you detach from that and get a search for whatever you're missing or whatever you need. Usually you just search Vanishing Lanius because it's like literally the best combo piece because it's just more combo pieces that it allows you to access. And then you get your search off Fuzzylanius, so you end with Vanishing and Fuzzy in hand, in my scenario, a Nest on board, and then double 4-Strix. Like, that's just a very simple +3 interaction that if you're able to back that up with any 1 to 3 of your other cards in hand being traps, that's just really good. And then also you can just extend that further by like getting Vanishing Lanius out of your deck. If you had other Raidraptors in your hand, and then Vanishing Lanius lets you get the other Raidraptors out of your hand and just generate more 4-Strixes essentially with that sort of card interaction. Like, this deck has very good 2-card openers that are just all very, very, very wide in their spectrum. The deck definitely doesn't have a problem with consistency nearly as much as people want to expect it to, because of the fact that it does look like a mishmash of monsters, but everything just kind of ties itself together really well, specifically with like the addition of cards like Swallow's Nest, the fact that Fuzzylanius just special summons itself, Vanishing Lanius turns any other monster in your hand into a Bora, basically, to make a Blackwing reference with another Darkwing Beast deck. But ultimately, the deck, at its current point, as I've said multiple times, just seems to lack a win condition, other than just pure resource beatdown, and that would be very good, actually, in a format. This deck would be really good and a very good pick if the format evolves its way into everyone going second. If everyone blinded second, and because this deck always wants to go first. This deck 100% of the time always wants to go first. Going second is such an actual problem because you usually want to set up your first turn just making 4 Strixes, and you don't actually have a lot of resources to your name to out boards. You end up gaining that resource on the next turn when you've protected your 4 Strixes. Like, that's the main selling point of the deck. So if the format ever evolved into everyone's blinding second, this deck becomes a very good pick. And I'm hesitant to say that this deck is capable of operating in like the top 5 capacity of like what you could say the best decks of the format are. It definitely has the potential to be there, but ultimately I don't think it's ultimately going to reach that gap until we get the cards from Shining Victories. But then by that time we're in a completely different format, and all host and manner of factors can just, change. Unfortunately, the deck is relatively, like, if you want to, barring some trap choices, obviously, the deck is relatively, like, budget for the main deck, but the extra deck is where you're going to be spending most of your money. 4 Strix, for some reason right now, is a $20 card, which I definitely don't agree with. This card definitely is, like, should not be more than 7 to 10. Like, and that's at the very most. This deck isn't best deck status. It's not vying for best deck status. It's just a good pick, but even then it's not even a good pick right now because of the fact that, like, everyone's trying to go first. Everyone and their mother is trying to go first. That's one of the reasons why I'm playing Mermails right now, is because I want to go second every game with that deck. If I win the die roll, I choose to go second. If I lose the die roll, my opponents 9 times out of 10 choose to go first because Pendulums, Cosmo, and Monarch all wish to go first. It's insane. But that just hurts this deck in the fact that your die roll becomes more emphasized. You have to actually win your die rolls to win the games that you're going to be playing with this deck. And this deck, like I've already said, has the inherent weakness of going second, that you actually just need to be making 4 Strixes before you do anything else. You have to be making 4 Strixes before you commit to any sort of board, because you get your extra resources to actually mold your board the way you want to on the following turn after you protected 4 Strix. Thus making the die roll a much greater emphasized factor playing this deck than it does with anything else in the format. Other decks like Cosmo, Monarch, and Draco Pals, or Pepe if you want to still call it that, but definitely, like, people just call it Draco Pals now. The Performa Pal deck, like, those decks all have just like they all have the ability to actually go second and out established boards. They all have that, like, potential. They all have that. Every single one of them can go second into an established field and at least try to play. This deck has to make 4 Strix first in order to function optimally, and that's a big issue that I have with the deck. But like I said, if the format ever shifted into where everyone was blinding second, literally everyone in the game was blinding second, this deck would be a very good pick. But then again, so would Heroes. So, like, this is one of those decks along those lines where this deck gets better or worse depending on how the format itself shapes up in terms of how the players are playing. But still, I think the deck is very good. None of what I'm saying that's detracting from the deck is meant to say the deck isn't good. I've definitely been having a lot of fun playing it. It's definitely very technical in how you structure your plays, because sometimes you just have to structure things in the ways where, like, you can't use Fuzzy Lanius because it locks you out of every other card in your extra deck that's not a Raidraptor, and sometimes you need those. Like, there's all these different factors that actually come into play, like when to use your Singing Lanius, when to recycle it, how to use it, how to use your Icarus attacks. All these things are very akin to, like, playing old school Blackwings back in, like, the 2009-2010 days, but sped up on the scale of this deck is much more cohesive of a theme, because instead of trying to make this synchro, this synchro, this synchro, this synchro like Blackwings were, and having a mishmash of levels that are trying to synchro, this deck is very, very efficient in the fact that it operates solely on the level 4, rank 4 basis, thus giving it a much more general access to everything. Like, that just fixes the issue, because ultimately, in terms of this deck versus Blackwings, neither one of the archetypes are actually largely more powerful than the other. The issue with, the Blackwing deck is that everything is mismatched. In fact, Blackwings, in terms of card quality, probably exceed this deck a little bit, because Whirlwind can be abused, you have cards like No Thung, you have these amazing synchros, but that's the issue, is that the deck is actually trying to synchro summon, whereas this deck has a slew of access into all of these generic rank 4s that make the deck capable of functioning more consistently against specific threats than Blackwings could. But to end the comparison to Blackwings there, like, I completely think that this deck has potential both now as well as in the future. I'm not sure if it even breaches that top 5 status of being like, I don't think this deck could rise up to be the 5th best deck of the format, to be standing alongside Monarch, Cosmo, Mermail, and Performapal. I don't think it can get there quite yet, unless some sort of innovation happens. If there's something that someone discovers that this deck can do, that would probably elevate it. But ultimately, the deck itself is still very good, and if you're looking for something to play that's fun, and that, I mean, I already said that 4 Strix is way too overpriced. I expect the card to go down. I would definitely wait to pick them up before picking up I would wait for the card to go down in price before I pick it up. Jesus. Rambling. But, like, if you're interested in playing a deck that's just fun and, like, actually rewards you for actual intellectual thought and stuff like that, but has a very low beginner entry level, this is a deck that's for you. Like, this deck is very fun, and there's a lot of things you can do with it that actually will just make things really just interesting. It's a very fun deck to play. It teaches you the basics of plussing and minusing, as well as if you are a, highly technical player and are functioning on a very high competitive axis in the game, then you will just play this deck and you'll have so much fun trying to figure out the different intricacies of how you can deal with threats. So ultimately, I think this is a deck that basically is for anyone, and I really enjoy that. But anyway, that is all for my thoughts on this deck. I want to know what you guys think about this deck in the comments down below. What do you think about Raidraptors in general? Try to keep the discussion strictly TCG legal at this point, even though Shining Victories does come out in like 2 months. I mean, that's still 2 months of events that we do not have this deck for, which is like YCS Las Vegas and YCS Houston. Like, we just don't have these. And then there's numerous ARGs. So try to keep the discussion TCG legal. If you want to use OCG relevant points like with Shining Victories, then go for it. But I mean, I'm just not gonna really take that much of an argument, like of a stance for you when you start bringing in OCG cards into the argument, because that's not really what we're trying to discuss here, and it's not relevant to us yet. There's multiple events until then. But other than that, as always, guys, thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe to all the nonsense you usually do. Links are in the description to my Facebook pages, my Twitch channel if you want to follow that and get notified whenever I go live for live streaming, which I do pretty frequently, actually, and then also the link to my Twitch alerts donations page. If you guys want to support me directly and you have some extra money lying around and you don't mind donating, and you can find it in the goodness of your heart to do so, definitely don't do so because you feel forced to, definitely not, then definitely consider donating if you're into that sort of thing. If not, if you just don't want to, or if you just don't have money like that, you are always welcome to support me with the free alternative, which is clicking ads on my YouTube videos. Click an ad if you have not. I'd greatly appreciate it. It helps me make money, and there's no reason to lie to you guys about that. If you have an ad block enabled, please disable it. It just helps me out more than I can ever stress or let you guys know, and you would have my eternal gratitude if you did either of the 2 options, because it definitely just helps support me, helps motivate me, and helps me justify more time to make videos as well. So keeps you entertained and keeps me doing something that's probably better than the alternative I could be doing. But anyway, that's all for this video. Let me know what you guys think, as I've already said, in the comments down below. Let's discuss this deck in general. But other than that, as always, guys, take care.